This is part 6 of the build for the Tamiya Avante Black Special. I have completed the rolling chassis and installed the electronics. All that remains is to there's a wing mount in the back that I have to assemble. It's just a couple of screws. Paint the body, paint the wing, paint the driver figure, mount it, and then it's done. So I just wanted to make a few comments before getting to painting the body. The hex screw kit that I got for the Avante, there were actually many screws left in this kit. And I think this kit was originally designed for the original Tamiya Avante. So that may explain some of the difference in the number of screws that I have left over. Although I don't really see how there'd be such a huge difference in the types of parts used that I'd have so many screws left over. I'm okay with it because it just means that I have spare screws to use for either this chassis or other chassis that I have which use metric screws, like the SC10 4x4, or maybe this guy, or maybe the Cyber 10B, something like that. But anyway, just wanted to point that out. The screw kit was only like 30 bucks or something, so I think it was worth it. As far as the chassis goes, since from the last build to this one, I installed, I believe, the front stabilizer and the front and rear shocks and the wheels and tires. So the front stabilizer, the actual bar itself, is a different bend than the rear stabilizer, which is right here. Okay, the rear stabilizer is thinner than the front one, and the front one, maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. It kind of mounts inside the front bumper here. As for the shocks, they are aluminum cap, aluminum shock body, oil-filled shocks. They do have a single O-ring seal. So modern shocks have a double O-ring seal with a little washer in the middle. This has a single O-ring with a plastic washer on top to guide the shock shaft. They work okay, but you know, new shocks have double O-ring seals. The first O-ring is supposed to be to seal out dirt and grime, and then the second O-ring is more for to help guide the shock shaft and to help keep I guess that part of it lubricated. But anyway, they work okay, and by the standards of 1988, when the chassis was originally designed, they're fine. I would say that maybe in terms of damping, the front is maybe a little oversprung. The rear is definitely light on the rebound. I'll actually show you right now. So if I put this down, okay, front works just fine. As for the rear, okay, it starts off at a certain height. The lighting here is not too good. If I press it down, you'll notice, and it comes back up, you'll notice that it won't return to its original height. Right? So the rebound is rather light on the rear. I guess that helps it stay planted, but it is maybe, not sure I want to say undersprung, but definitely soft at the rear. Yeah. Okay, so comments on the chassis in general. I did talk about in the other video how it's rather arduous to adjust front camber, rear camber, and rear toe-in, because you have to remove one of these links and make screw this a couple of turns and then put it back in and then make your measurements. The steering linkage, you kind of see here, does have turnbuckles. They're not very good turnbuckles, but they are turnbuckles. So at least you can adjust front toe-in without disassembling anything. And the front, well, the steering set is actually not bad. This is the racing steering set that comes with the Black Special. It has this carbon fiber linkage between the two bell crank units. This whole thing uses 8-ball bearings, so there's 2 here, and then another 2 under each of the joints here that link this bar to the mount cranks. So 8 bearings total. From the hug carrier out to, let me just flip this here, out to this joint, there's very little slop actually. I'm pretty impressed. But what undermines this whole thing is the crappy servo saver. This is just the standard 3-piece Tamiya servo saver that you build off of parts from a parts tree. So this bit here is where you have a ton of steering slop. I don't know if you can hear or not, but the servo motor is not moving. Right, I'm just forcing this back and forth. That's all the slop in the servo saver. Okay, so if you're serious about this chassis, just get a actual good servo saver. I do have some lying around. I just haven't installed it. So servo saver kind of sucks. Not something you'd expect for a $400+ chassis. The tires, I had mentioned in the second video, I think, that I don't want to run these on the street or even on the track. I'd like to keep these tires mint, but it is worth noting that they are hard. The inside bead, if you want to call it that, is very, very rigid. So to pull the tire over the rims and mount them in the little notch on the inside of the rims, extremely difficult. It took me maybe 15-20 minutes just to get all 4 tires mounted, and it's actually painful on your fingers because you really got to pull on them. They do not come with foam inserts, so it's just air in here. So I would not by any means call these high performance tires, but they do look cool. So from an aesthetic viewpoint, they're nice, but from a performance standpoint, forget it. Get some proper hole shots or double D's or something like that if you really want good tires. What else? A few other things I was going to mention here. Oh, so I guess my impressions in general about the chassis is that the build was pretty interesting, and I hope you found it interesting over this 6 video series here. But as an actual racing chassis, we have to bear in mind that this is a vintage chassis, right? It's not a B44 or a XXX4 or a Durango DEX 410 or anything like that. This is a 1988 or circa 1988 Tamiya Avante with some minor upgrades. So by modern standards, it's a pile of crap. But by 1988 standards, it's okay. The only real problem I have with it is I do think it is overpriced, especially considering what you get. So for example, it does come with a carbon fiber chassis, but the actual carbon fiber plates, upper and lower deck, are only 2 millimeters thick. On the B44, they're 3 millimeters thick. On the B44.1, they're 4 millimeters thick. So this chassis, I would question its durability because the plates are so thin. And outside of that, like the gearbox design is nothing special. I had forgotten to mention in many of the other, well, actually all of the other builds, if you recall from the very, very first video, I don't have the manual around me, there was a little pin that you have to shove through the gearbox from the outside to mount one of the gears on the inside. And then you have to put a piece of tape over it to prevent the pin from falling out of the gearbox. And it's not until you mount the hinge pin that this ball end mounts on that you get to take that tape off, because this assembly here covers that hole that the drive pin inside the gearbox mounts into. So that's kind of a weird design. I don't know of any other transmission that has openings in it. This is the first one that I built that's like that, and for a chassis that's of this caliber, I think that's pretty unacceptable. So that's one problem. Although, I mean, you're very likely not going to have to deal with it so much because chances are you're not going to disassemble this part. But in general, the transmission design is, not up to modern standards. But again, this is not really a modern car. So would I pay for it again, knowing what I know now as far as the build goes, as far as how I would anticipate this thing would perform? I think it depends. If you're going to spend $400+ on a chassis like this, it's obviously not going to be for racing, right? If you want a good racing chassis, get a B44, get something, you know, really decent. So if you're going to spend this kind of money, it's really just for the joy of having a vintage Tamiya chassis. And if that's what you want, and if you can afford it, okay, fine. I'll probably run this thing a few times. For the most part, it'll be maybe a shelf clean, like my TA02. I don't really run that a whole lot. I have mixed feelings about it. I do wish that Tamiya would not have included their own motor and speed control with the kit, because that would have brought the price down to maybe around $300, and that would have been maybe still overpriced, but definitely acceptable. And you know, bear in mind what you're paying for here is a lot of metal bits and some carbon fiber bits, and that's really probably what makes it expensive. But if you consider that modern racing chassis have metal bits and carbon fiber bits, and they don't cost quite as much as this, you do have to question why they're charging that much money. And it's probably because it's a limited edition release, and so they know there's going to be demand for it, and so they jack up the price. So not really worth the money, but if you can afford it and you really want it, you know, it's okay. So that's more or less it. I would say that, you know, the wiring here is a little funky. This is just because the original wiring that came with the Novak Super Sport was long, so I had to sort of twist this around to get it to mount reasonably well. So I'd rather not have to cut this. This sensor wire is a little long, so we'll have to see how this all fits in when I get the driver figure all set up and the body and everything. I may have to really scrunch this up or something, so we'll see how that works later on. Yeah, so that's pretty much it as far as the build goes. I'm sure I have other things that I would like to say about this. I just can't think of them right now. But for now, I'm just going to leave it at this, and in the future, when I get the body painted and mounted, I'll make another video. I have to order smoke paint. That's the main paint scheme for the Black Special, is a smoke color. I don't have that on me, so it may take me some time before I make the next video. Yeah, but maybe I'll just go around the chassis, show you some of the bits here in a somewhat zoomed in view. Okay, that's the front. I'll just put it on the floor again here. It does settle pretty nicely. Like if you drop it, you know, it doesn't bounce or anything. It just kind of sits there. It squats pretty well. At least the rear squats pretty well. The front rebounds pretty nicely. So it's okay. You know, definitely overpriced though. So that's it for this one.